Developing musicianship online.
Today we carry on with our process of graphic equalizing our mix and bringing instruments out or tucking instruments in to get a good balance of our overall mix. So far we've looked at Kyle the drummer and we've looked at the bass player in isolation. So let's now go and start looking at combinations of instruments and how we process the graphic equalizer to get the best out of our ensemble sound. Let's go. Now, EQing is not just about getting bass and drums to coexist. You need to make sure you've got the whole mix in there. So I'll just go to the jazz organ for a second and pull that up. Now it's a MIDI instrument, so it's being designed to sound good in the context in which it was originally designed. So when I put it in, again, a spectrum analysis would be useful. So if I go to the master and just bring up this, we're going to see where it's sitting in amongst the bass and the drums. And if I just take it out again, you'll see where the frequencies are actually popping out because of the organ. And back again with the organ. So you'll see around between 1 and 2K, there's a lot of organ. So if I need that organ to stand out more, then that's the frequency range I really want to start looking at to make that the organ range. So let me go into the jazz organ track and add in an EQ. For some reason they don't put EQs in the MIDI. And remember 1 to 2K. If I look at this now, it should give me that 1 to 2K. This is just the jazz organ channel. You can see some big spikes. Now remember, this little 100 to 200 range is going to be competing with our drums. So ideally, it'd be really good to get rid of some of that range so we're not having the competition. So I've put in a low cut. It's going to stop us really having competition. But it may take a little bit of the guts out of the organ. Let's have a listen and see what it sounds like. Okay, that's fine. It's just giving more space for the drums and the bass to breathe. And following on from that, we can start looking at boosting a particular frequency through sweeping for where that optimum spot is to have the instrument come out a little bit from the mix. So this time I've got a boost channel, and again I can just sweep, and I know that it's going to be probably between 1 and 2K where I'm really going to want a little bit more presence. So let's try that. You can just hear that the attack now is slightly more aggressive and more prominent in the mix of instruments. So I'm going to keep the organ there for the moment. Again, I've got many organs, so I'm going to want to make sure I save my preset, and I'm going to save it somewhere where I can actually find it. So I'll call it number 1 and organ EQ. That way I can put the same EQ on the other jazz organ. Remember that the organ actually wasn't set up with an EQ, so it's a plug-in that I've had to add. Okay, so that's 2 organs, and the only thing left is my vocals. I've got 2 aims with my vocals. I want the vocals to sound good by themselves because I've actually had the vocals be in a spot in the music where they're completely by themselves. So I need to make sure I EQ the vocals by themselves, and then just make sure that contextually they work with everything else. If we turn on the analyzer of the vocals, we're going to see where the predominant frequencies are and where we possibly could do with boosts and cuts. Again, we don't want it competing with too much of the low end, because there is a moment where they do join and you don't want the vocals to get muddy in amongst the bass and the kick.
DM, developing musicianship online.
So you can see there's a tiny bit of sound below 200 Hertz. It's not going to make a big difference, however, to put a nice cut in there and just take that out of the mix. And that should just allow the bass and the drums to still have breathing space. And now that we've got the scenario of the organ, we want to try and avoid sharing space with the organ, although, to be quite honest, in this arrangement there's no point where the organ and the voice are together. But in a normal circumstance, we want to make sure we're giving a frequency range to the voice that is not getting tied up in the same frequencies as the organ. So again, it's the same process. I want to sweep my frequency range and find the frequencies that really make my voice sound nice in this scenario. So I'm going to go for something a little bit more toppy and see how we go.
DM, developing musicianship online.
Okay, so you'll see how thin that made it with the higher boost. Sometimes this can be a matter of just taking the cue and widening out the spectrum that you're boosting. Also, being a bit more subtle about how much you boost. Okay, so it's the same register, but now with a wider spectrum being affected and with a less in the face adjustment.
DM, developing musicianship online.
Now I'm still finding that it's not rich enough, so I'm going to push down into that lower register and maybe widen the frequency range even more, so that I'm taking a collection of frequencies in that range up a little bit.
DM, developing musicianship online.
I like that better, but I still feel like it needs something more in to give it that depth that it used to have. And so I'm thinking that I actually need to boost something around the 200, but I want to leave those high frequencies up just to give it more presence overall. But I'm going to also give it a second boost in the lower register and see if I can get some of that, the resonance out in the mix.
DM, developing musicianship online.
This time I'm finding the frequency ranges may be close, but I just need a little bit more width in the amount that I'm actually expanding into.
DM, developing musicianship online.
It's not a bad balance. So this is going to be very much about fiddling with the mix some further. So I'm going to put everything back in and hear the sound in context. So I've just been off camera having a good look over the whole mix. It takes time to get the balances right, and you've got to be prepared to really play around with the overall mix. So in the end, I found that Kyle the drummer needed a little bit of top end just to brighten up some of the sounds. So there's some brighter sounds brought up in the upper frequencies for the cymbals, and a couple of boosts for the snare drum to make the snare drum sort of ring out in the mix. With the jazz organ, I adopted a second setting called organ 2 and widened the spectrum in which I'm boosting rather than going in such a narrow spectrum, just to give it some more depth. And with the bass, I also went in and just altered the boost slightly, reduced it so that it wasn't so abrupt. Together, I ended up having a fairly balanced mix of frequencies. This is just the part I've been working on.
Developing musicianship online.
Okay, so it's tough. EQ is an advanced skill to do it right, and you can really mess up your mixes if you don't experiment, play around with, and be flexible with your way of thinking about EQ. Plus, having some balanced speakers that don't have bias is kind of important to getting a consistent mix with your EQ. I haven't addressed the master EQ at this point because that's really a separate task of mastering after you finish doing this and doing compression. So next time I'll address compression. Till then, thanks for joining me. Subscribe if you enjoy what I have to offer, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Developing musicianship online.